Hello, I'm Esther Gido-Ewart. It's Wednesday, April 26th. This is Africa 54. The United Nations Special Envoy to Sudan says both warring sides in Sudan's crisis seem to think they can secure military victory. U.S. businesses are increasingly using drones to deliver groceries and other items to your front door. And the death of legendary actor, singer, and civil rights activist Harry Belafonte at age 96 brings worldwide reaction. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The 72-hour ceasefire in Sudan, brokered by the United States, is struggling to hold after the regular army launched renewed airstrikes against rival paramilitary forces in the capital, Khartoum. Sudanese and foreigners are streaming out of the city and other battle zones. Millions of Sudanese are caught in the crossfire, struggling to find food, shelter, and medical care as explosions, gunfire, and looters wreck their neighborhoods. Aid agencies are sounding the alarm over the crumbling humanitarian situation. Meanwhile, the United Nations Special Envoy to Sudan says that both warring sides in the conflict seem to think they can secure military victory, but warns that's a miscalculation. This report from David Doyle contains graphic content, and viewer discretion is advised.
There is no sign that warring parties in Sudan are ready to seriously negotiate, the United Nations Special Envoy to the country said on Tuesday. Speaking to the UN Security Council via video link from Port Sudan, Volker Perthes said both sides seem to think that securing a military victory over the other is possible.
This is a miscalculation. As fighting continues, law and order will further break down throughout the country, and command and control will dissipate. Sudan could become increasingly fragmented, which would have a devastating impact on the region. And even if one side wins, Sudan will lose.
Fighting between the Sudan Armed Forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces erupted on April 15th. Both parties agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire beginning on Tuesday, which Perthes said seemed to be holding in some parts so far.
However, we also hear continuing reports of fighting and movement of troops.
At this hospital in Omdurman, an adjacent city to the capital Khartoum, a projectile was reported to have pierced the building and exploded inside. Staff said no one was killed, but 13 people were treated for injuries. Some hospitals have been destroyed in the violence that has turned residential areas into battlefields and triggered a humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands wounded as the paramilitaries embedded in neighborhoods and the army targeted them from the air. Thousands have fled the capital, but many, like data analyst Bandar Dawalbait, remain trapped in their homes. In this video, he and a friend have risked venturing into the streets in search of water.
I feel like if we didn't die because of live ammunition or a bomb or even RPG bomb or aircraft bomb also, we might die from hunger and thirsty.
The UN's humanitarian office said shortages of food, water, medicines and fuel were becoming extremely acute and that prices were surging. The UN Refugee Agency has forecast that hundreds of thousands might flee to neighbouring countries. Speaking at the Security Council, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres described the violence and chaos thus far as heartbreaking.
A prolonged, full-scale war is unbearable to contemplate.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. For more United Nations reaction to the crisis in Sudan, I'm joined live from New York by VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir. Hello, Margaret.
Hi, Esther.
Now, last night, Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressed the Council on Sudan. Tell us more about what he said.
Yeah, I think I'll just pick up where David left off. Antonio Guterres was very clear. He said that Sudan has 7 countries around it, 7 neighbors, and that if this drags on and becomes a full-scale war and is prolonged, it has the risk of spilling over to the neighbors, but also setting back the region's development, he said, by decades. So he is really, really calling for the guns to fall silent because it's just putting so much at risk, not just Sudan.
And what's more, what is the UN doing to extend the ceasefire that, of course, didn't really hold as much as was expected? There are some measures being taken by the world body.
Right, so it's due to expire, I believe, on Thursday, and Mr. Perthes, Volker Perthes, the UN envoy, is working along with other regional groups and interested countries trying to get it extended. What the UN really wants is a sustainable ceasefire, and then they can move to talks between the 2 generals, and from there, try and get the country back on track to this transition to civilian government, which was really so within reach just a couple of weeks ago. So that's what the UN is working on right now.
Margaret, do we know whether aid operations are still ongoing in Sudan given this volatile situation?
Sure, it's a really difficult and dangerous period for aid workers. Their movements are constrained just like the populations. The UN can't really fly in new supplies right now. Airspace isn't particularly open, and Khartoum airport was damaged in the fighting and such. They're focused on relocating staff around the country to Port Sudan and to some other locations. 5 aid workers have been killed in the past 11 days in the crossfire in the violence. But the UN is very clear, very adamant. They are not leaving Sudan. They are staying and they are assisting the people. You know, before the fighting started, there were around 15 million Sudanese who needed humanitarian assistance. So the UN isn't going anywhere, but they're just having to suspend a bit for now, and hopefully if they can get a sustainable ceasefire, which is what they really need, then they can resume helping people at the scale and with the speed that they need to do it.
Margaret, very briefly, do you know if the Sudanese ambassador to the United Nations has made any statement so far about this conflict?
Sorry, the Sudanese ambassador, did you say?
To the UN. Has he spoken at all?
Yes. Yes, he spoke at the Security Council meeting on Tuesday night, and he basically said this is an internal matter. Everybody kind of keep your nose out of it, and we will find African solutions for African problems. That was sort of his message. He was a bit stern with the Council.
Margaret, thanks. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir reporting live for us from New York. VOA's Anthony Labruto recently spoke here in Washington to Sudanese Ambassador Mohamed Idris about the current conflict in Sudan and how the Sudanese government is working to keep people fleeing violence safe within the country.
The government is trying its best, and this truce and the ceasefire also is one of the ways or a means of enabling people also to maybe to move from one area of challenges to another safe area. So this truce and the ceasefire will give if the other party respect it, will give the civilians a chance to move from one area to a safe area if they are feeling that they are not safe in this area, so they can move to another safe area. But that is the responsibility of the government, and the government is committed to protect the civilians and committed to make sure that they are in safe areas and that they are getting the needed services.
That was the Sudanese ambassador to the U.S., Mohamed Idris, speaking to VOA's Anthony Labruto. Jacqueline Burns, a former advisor to the U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan and South Sudan, says the U.S. can learn from the challenges it's faced during past negotiations in Sudan's transition process in order to de-escalate the current fighting.
I know the U.S., the UN, and others are working around the clock to try and get Hemeti and al-Burhan to agree to a ceasefire, which is absolutely necessary, but also very difficult. Each time they've got an agreement, neither side has abided by it. There's also command and control issues. Even if the leaders agree to it, we're not sure that they'll be able to effectively communicate in a timely manner to their fighters to stop fighting. So this is difficult. They do need to keep this work. However, the humanitarian situation is very bad. We do need to see an end to the fighting if human suffering is going to be minimized. But in addition to this, right, that's the very short-term immediate measure. In addition to this, we need pressure on these leaders from all sides, from regional supporters and organizations alike, to get them to stop the violence. And more broadly, really the long-term focus, and it's not an easy road, as I noted, needs to be in prioritizing the voices of the civilian actors, of the civil society, women's groups, other actors that are really interested in political reform and in seeing Sudan lead to a civilian-led peaceful outcome, rather than continuing to prioritize the voices of Hemeti and al-Burhan.
That was Jacqueline Burns, a former advisor to the U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan and South Sudan. For more on the conflict in Sudan, I'm joined live via Skype from Washington by DeBa, Deputy Director of Policy at the Sentry, an organization that investigates corruption and human rights violations in Africa. Brian, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, what is the likelihood of resolving this conflict in Sudan?
It's hard to tell now, but what needs to happen is there's need to build on the gains made so far in terms of the ceasefire, with the specific aim of reaching to a permanent ceasefire. And to do that, the international community needs to mobilize entities that have influence with the actors in the conflict in Sudan. And specifically, one can mention countries like Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and South Sudan, including the regional organization IGAD, that have influence with the actors in the Sudanese conflict, including Hemeti and Burhan. And once a ceasefire has been arrived at and negotiations are ongoing, the international community also needs to ensure that there are consequences for violating the ceasefire. And one way to do that is to ensure that targeted financial sanctions are imposed on the significant business enterprises of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and the Sudanese military itself. That way, the international community can secure a lasting ceasefire and a resolution to the conflict. Ultimately, of course, the idea is to get the military out of the picture in politics in South Sudan, in Sudan.
Brian, what do you make of the recent prison breaks where so many thousands of prisoners were released, including former officials allied to the ousted president Omar al-Bashir?
Previously, you had some of the speakers on these shows talk about command and control issues. What this signifies is that there are Bashir and his government still have a lot of support within quarters in the Sudanese military, and including perhaps in the RSF, because it's not clear who actually enabled this escape from prison. So it shows that these people still have some support and control, and we cannot rule out the possibility that they would want to bring Bashir back into the political scene.
Brian, very briefly, what about the implications now for the region with all these people fleeing the country?
There's an extra burden that is going to be created for the countries in the region in terms of hosting refugees, and that is going to increase the financial pressure, it will increase the competition for resources where these refugees settle, This will increase the potential for conflict between local communities and refugees. And then there's also the political dimension of the conflict. If there are quarters in the region that are arming any of the parties to the conflict, allegedly there are reports of connections between the RSF and entities in Libya that could draw the region into a regional conflict, in fact.
Wow. Brian, thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Brian DeBa is Deputy Director of Policy at the Sentry. A Nigerian student in Khartoum posted a video on Wednesday showing crowds of stranded Nigerians waiting for buses to leave Sudan. Omar Yusuf Yaru says the students have been waiting for buses for 3 days without food and water. Many foreign countries are airlifting its diplomats and private citizens out of Sudan after several attacks, including the killing of an Egyptian attaché on his way to work. However, the situation in Khartoum remains chaotic.
It's a shame to embassy of Nigeria. You look what's happening. Look what's happening. What's happening. This is all of us here. We've been here almost like 3 days with no food, with no water. What is this? Doesn't make sense. They're supposed to do more than this, wallahi. We expect them to do more than this. But for now, we're just here. We don't know whether there is going to be movement, there is not going to be movement. I'm not sure of anything. So you see, this is how it is everywhere. You can see, this is the situation here. This is the situation here. This is how it is here, everywhere.
The Nigerian Emergency Management Agency says arrangements have been concluded to begin the evacuation of 3,500 Nigerians stranded in Sudan. Onimode Bandele, Director of Special Duties of the agency, told reporters in Abuja that they are working on logistics to ensure safety. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, using drones to deliver groceries right to your front door. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, Sudanese civilians and foreign nationals are fleeing Khartoum during a 3-day truce. It comes amid raging fighting between Sudanese government troops and the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group. What is the role of the international community in this conflict? And can they help bring peace? Join me, Hayley Adams, for an in-depth look at the crisis in Sudan on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, survivors of a massacre in northern Burkina Faso are describing an hours-long ordeal in which men in army uniforms carried out arbitrary killings, including women who were carrying babies on their backs. The attack unfolded on April 20th in the village of Karma, but was not officially disclosed until this week. Distraught relatives are awaiting news of loved ones linked to a suspected starvation cult in Kenya. The death toll has climbed to at least 90, and children account for more than half of the victims, according to police. A Kenya Red Cross official says the rescuers found 2 more bodies in the bush on Wednesday. And the former chief executive of South African state power firm Eskom, Andre de Ruyter, says that a previous estimate he gave that $55 million was being stolen from Eskom every month was conservative. De Ruyter says he cannot corroborate or provide detail on certain allegations because the documents remain with Eskom or law enforcement agencies. U.S. President Joe Biden has announced that he will run for re-election in 2024 alongside Vice President Kamala Harris. The announcement came through a released video, says he will run on a platform of economic growth, protecting reproductive rights and curbing gun violence. VOA's Anita Powell reports from the White House.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election.
And with that, the 2024 presidential campaign has begun, with President Joe Biden releasing this announcement early Tuesday. He faces a likely rematch with former President Donald Trump, who announced his candidacy last year and continues to claim that he, not Biden, won the 2020 election.
We will make America glorious again.
Trump, who polls indicate is the most popular Republican candidate, faces legal peril after being indicted in New York over hush money payments made to an adult film star. Prosecutors in Georgia are also considering charging him over his actions in the state's 2020 vote count. He has made his legal woes part of his campaign.
These numbers are one of the main reasons the Marxist left is coming after us, and they're using the criminal justice system for massive election interference. That's what they're doing.
With more than 18 months until Election Day, more than a third of Americans report they already feel exhaustion over the idea of another Biden and Trump contest. Another 29% said the idea of a rematch provoked feelings of fear. Biden opened his re-election announcement with images of a violent mob thronging the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Biden shows 3 elected representatives he has described as MAGA extremists, a reference to Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again." Polls indicate a clear majority of Americans oppose the Capitol riot, but Biden still faces an uphill political battle, analysts say.
And he remains a divisive figure. His popularity has been under 50% since the Afghanistan withdrawal, and he has not been a particularly popular president in sort of the more general terms of we are in partisan times.
The ad also mentions the debate over abortion access in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision last year to throw the decision over abortion access to the states. Biden's running mate, Vice President Kamala Harris, is used to illustrate the administration's support for abortion access. The ad doesn't reference Biden's age, but he faces criticism that at 80, he is too old to hold what many see as the world's most stressful job. American voters will ultimately decide at the polls in November of 2024. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
Residents of Nairobi share their thoughts on President Biden's announcement that he will seek re-election in 2024.
I really don't prefer President Biden. I prefer the former President Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, in as much as we see him a bad person, he is not a bad person. He talks from his mind. He tells the truth about Africa. And for a long time, Africa is a continent whereby we are relying on aids, we are relying on donations, which is making us not to grow because it is making us to sleep. But Mr. Trump, he speaks the truth about Africa. So I prefer that he captures that seat for White House so that he continues with his policies which he left before. Then Africa, we will be disciplined and we will now know how to be self-reliant.
I don't think Joe Biden should vie for a second term, because one thing, age, I believe age, he would have been aged by then, but I don't believe age fear makes him not to vie. But still, I prefer him letting other candidates, because of maybe some youthful person might want to run, and it will be so energetic to allow other youthful people to vie for the presidency. So I don't believe in Joe Biden vying for a second term.
Joe Biden, I support him 100% because right now he has, I think, settled everything that is supposed to be settled in America. And according to my opinion, for me, I support him because he has supported us as Kenyans. There are some things that he has supported us, and because as Kenyans or other countries, for Joe Biden is okay to me.
Kenyans in Nairobi reacting to U.S. President Joe Biden's re-election announcement. Drones are routinely used in warfare, law enforcement, and agriculture. Now, increasingly, U.S. businesses are using them to deliver groceries and other items right to your front door. VOA's Julie Tabo has more.
Something unusual is happening in this Eastern Virginia suburb. Groceries are being delivered to the Ball family via drone.
It's super convenient for us. Having twins, we don't have to spend the extra time of loading them up, loading them in the cart.
Ball ordered his goods online from a nearby Walmart, one of America's largest retailers, which made more than 6,000 deliveries via drone to his customers last year.
Drones, they really check a couple of different boxes. One, in terms of their efficiency and effectiveness, they're really quick. Also, they're very sustainable.
The company uses a service called Drona to deliver the bulk of its orders. Drone delivery services are especially suited for people living in rural areas and adults who are older or have mobility issues. The drone stays about 25 meters above ground, which helps with privacy and reduces the noise level. But the main challenge, DroneUp says, is the strict regulations imposed by the Federal Aviation Administration.
I think the FAA has done a great deal to advance drone technology, but it has not kept up with where we're headed.
In a statement to VOA, the FAA said that in September, it will require drones to broadcast remote identification information, a major step towards enabling unmanned traffic management.
Drone integration is a very big topic at the FAA. We're talking about issues of how you integrate drones into the existing air traffic control system.
Which is good news for consumers.
Yeah, I think the whole unmanned aviation in the future is really going to be beneficial to everyone. As more companies come online, you're going to be able to get your products to your house faster and safer.
Julie Tabo, VOA News, Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Reaction is pouring in from the entertainment world following the death of legendary actor and singer Harry Belafonte. A family spokeswoman says Belafonte, 96, died Tuesday of congestive heart failure at his New York home with his wife Pamela by his side. Belafonte was a dedicated activist, an award-winning actor and singer. He sold millions of records and starred on stage and screen before scaling back his career and becoming a relentless supporter of civil rights. Belafonte not only participated in protest marches and benefit concerts, but helped organize and raise support for them. He often worked closely with his friend, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
His voice, I'm just going to be shallow. He's a very handsome man. He's very good looking. Raised good kids. I'm on a board with one of his daughters. He never put fame before activism. And again, it's like the same conversation we had about being a billionaire. At a certain point, you have to choose. If you want to be an activist in the entertainment industry, at a certain point, you have to go, oh, I'm going to come see the show, though.
Entertainment mogul Tyler Perry tweeted that Belafonte was activist, role model, and hero. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.